Hey guys, tonight we dive into the steamy, fragrant, bustling kitchens of the Tang Dynasty. Just imagine stepping through a silk curtain into a realm where culinary creativity ruled imperial China from around 618 to 907 AD. You find yourself in a grand kitchen alive with sizzling woks, the sharp chatter of assistants, and the rhythmic chopping of cleavers echoing on polished stone slabs. The air is thick with heady aromas, star anise, fresh ginger, fermented soy sauces, mingling with the fragrant bamboo smoke curling from a charcoal brazier. It's a sensory overload. You'd think this was a five-star restaurant without electricity or Michelin stars, but plenty of dragon motifs. Now, before you start drooling, a gentle reality check. Surviving a day in a Tang kitchen wasn't all spicy delights and delicious breakthroughs. Food safety was a dicey game, and chefs worked long hours with no air conditioning and subtropical heat. Oh, and no, you probably won't survive this kitchen's fiery pace without some serious skills, or at least being very polite to your head chef. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you want to share, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world we're all tasting history together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by stepping into a Tang imperial kitchen, a sprawling space hidden behind the palace walls, where scores of cooks maneuver around huge clay stoves and iron pots, flames licking the air like small dragons. The cooking staff is mostly male, organized in tight hierarchies, but women also played roles, though historians still argue whether high-ranking women might actually have been silent masterminds behind some banquet dishes. The imperial kitchen was a hive of motion, glowing with silken banners and rugged wooden tables. The chief cook wore thick robes embroidered with phoenixes, symbols of culinary royalty, and wielded a massive cleaver, a sort of kitchen scepter. The utensils were simple yet specialized: bamboo steamers, woks cast from bronze, wooden spatulas curved for stir-frying, plus a curious variety of ceramic pots. The smell of fresh ginger and garlic lit the room, though some cooks added plug-like chunks of dried animal dung in the fires, a quirky but effective Tang trick for consistent heat and fragrant smoke, as you might recall from tales of ancient sunscreen made with crocodile dung, a practical, if slightly eyebrow-raising, kitchen hack. Rare ingredients were shuffled from storerooms, cooled with ice brought down from northern mountains during winter, preserving precious meats and fish. Historians still debate whether ice cellars were truly widespread or limited to elite palaces, but the concept of food preservation was already sophisticated. Some meats were marinated in fermented paste blends, tangy and pungent, while vegetables were pickled in vinegar infused with herbs, extending the Tang palate far beyond simple boil and serve. The Tang Dynasty was arguably the golden age of Chinese culinary arts, where cooking leapt from mere sustenance to an expressive art form. With the Silk Road flourishing, imperial kitchens were among the first to feature ingredients like sesame, walnuts, even early versions of chili peppers, though chili itself wasn't introduced until later. Still, the Tang chefs spiced up dishes with black pepper from India and aromatic coriander, a flavor that many in your kitchen today might find unexpectedly bold. Picture a kitchen assistant deftly slicing lotus roots while humming a popular court song, tossing slivers into a bubbling broth of ginger and scallion. Nearby, another stirs a thick black sauce, a symphony of soy and fermented beans simmering slowly to sweet nectar. These flavors were carefully balanced, emphasizing harmony in color, texture, fragrance, and taste, a culinary philosophy ingrained in Tang food culture. Historians still argue whether some lavish banquets featuring hundreds of dishes actually happened as depicted or were more aspirational storytelling, but no doubt the sumptuous feasts were the stuff of imperial legend and the kitchens were their fiery hearts. So here you are, enveloped by savory steam clouds, standing amid a culinary kingdom where tradition and experimentation blend, and the story of China's food culture first begins to unfold in earnest. You probably won't find these ancient recipes written plainly in cookbooks, since many were guarded secrets or passed down orally. But tonight, that veil will lift just a bit as we journey further into this Tang kitchen. In the wake of that lively kitchen scene, you now find yourself amidst an imperial banquet hall in full splendor, the sort of grand affair where the Tang Dynasty's emperors displayed their power through sheer extravagance on the dining table. Tables groan under mountains of jade-white porcelain dishes filled with steamed fish, spiced game birds, and sweet rice cakes glittering like jewels under delicate lantern light. Imagine the scent of roasted wild boar mingling with rose petals and pine smoked duck, all washing over you as court musicians softly play the guqin in the background. Each dish is a work of art, painstakingly assembled to not only satisfy hunger, but impress status and wealth. It turns out that these banquets weren't just about food. You, seated among nobility, feel the underlying current of politics and social diplomacy in each taste. Banquets often lasted for hours, sometimes stretching through entire evenings, with courses served in rhythm to the entertainment. Exotic fruits like pomegranates and peaches were brought out as symbols of longevity and prosperity, while wine flowed through intricately designed cups carved from jade and horned with precious metals. Historians still argue whether the scale of these feasts was as regular as the sources imply or reserved for only the most special occasions. Fascinatingly, the Tang emperors sometimes invited foreign dignitaries to these events, where the kitchen experimented with introducing Persian and Central Asian influences. You might find yourself nibbling on lamb marinated with coriander and saffron, flavors far removed from the typical Chinese palate, but embraced with imperial panache. The Silk Road's impact is notable here. Spices, nuts, and even noodles traveled vast distances to grace these royal dinners. The order and presentation of dishes followed a rigid hierarchy. Seafood first, then poultry, meats, vegetables, and desserts last. Generally, dishes were arranged not only for their flavors, but for their symbolic meanings. Bamboo shoots representing resilience, lotus seeds representing purity. These banquets were almost theatrical, with waiters dressed like mythical beasts balancing trays precariously while guests observed refined etiquette that some historians suggest was part theater, part power play. On the more curious side, one banquet menu reportedly included a dish consisting of chicken cooked in soup with gold flakes scattered atop. Not because it was tasty, though edible gold is tasteless, but as a dazzling display of wealth. Not your typical budget dinner, right? The ancient nobles certainly knew their bling. At the same time, despite the opulence, some records hint at certain recurrent ingredients: wheat-based noodles, fermented soy, various mutton cuts, used repeatedly to maintain a sense of familiarity amidst the extravagance. Scholars continue to debate just how much of this was political theater versus genuine gastronomic delight. The atmosphere hums with the murmur of high officials trading gossip alongside chopsticks grabbing morsels of spiced frog or tender bamboo shoots glazed with honey. This ceremonial dining scene was a microcosm of Tang society, reflecting its cosmopolitan nature, artistic ambition, and unmistakable appetite for sensory pleasure. Let yourself savor this blend of luxury and cultural fusion. Behind every bite is a story of trade routes, political alliances, and culinary curiosity pushing the boundaries of traditional Chinese food. And remember, this banquet wasn't just about eating, it was a full sensory immersion meant to demonstrate the empire's wealth and sophistication. So, as you recline among silk cushions, holding a tiny porcelain cup of fermented rice wine, you share not only food, but the essence of Tang Dynasty's golden age, a foodie kingdom where every morsel spoke of empire, diplomacy, and the pursuit of pleasure. You're still lingering in that lush imperial estate, now drawn toward the tantalizing world of Tang Dynasty spices and flavor profiles, the secret ingredients that made the food not just nourishment, but an experience. It's like discovering the hidden handshake of a gastronomic club that spans centuries. Tang cooks, whether they were palace chefs or street vendors serving noodles, knew how to layer flavors expertly, balancing sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami in ways that still inspire chefs today. But the exact spice blends and seasoning techniques often remain a mystery, since many are lost to time or hidden in semi-mythical cookbooks. Historians still argue whether Tang chefs use certain spices heavily or reserve them mainly for elite tables. The mainstay seasonings you can count on include salt and vinegar, naturally, but also ginger, garlic, and scallions, which might sound familiar to you, but back then, fresh ginger and wild garlic were especially prized. Cinnamon and star anise have roots that date back to this era, and charting when these aromatics entered common use is a lively topic among scholars. A quirky tidbit that might surprise you: there's mention of a condiment made from crushed crocodile dung. Yes, you read that right. Some ancient texts hint that it was used as a pungent seasoning, or maybe even a preservative. While it sounds absolutely revolting today, it's another reminder that history's palates were fearless in experimenting with flavors and preservation techniques, even if modern sensibilities might shudder at the thought. In addition, fermented sauces were Tang staples. Soybean pastes, fermented fish sauces, and pickles not only added depth, but helped preserve foods through changing seasons, the culinary equivalent of last year's grandma's Pinterest survival hacks. These condiments gave dishes a complex umami punch long before the term existed. Tang Dynasty cuisine was also notable for the interplay of sugars and acids. Honey and malt syrup sweetened many dishes, but vinegar balanced this sweetness for harmony in the dish. Sort of like how you might toss a splash of lemon on salmon today. They used fruit vinegars too, especially from plums or rice, to add bright notes. Another fascinating flavor favorite was the use of Sichuan peppercorns. Not the hot chili heat we think of, but a numbing, floral spice that tingled the tongue. Some reports suggest that the popularity of these peppercorns began quite early, with Tang chefs using them to enliven meat dishes and sauces. However, exactly when and how they became widespread across culinary regions remains debated. Tang cooks were also fond of blending flavors based on a crude early version of yin and yang principles, balancing hot and cold ingredients to better regulate the body. This philosophy grew into what was later called Chinese medicinal cooking, and we will explore this blend of cuisine and health more in later sections. Some dishes were cooked with medicinal herbs, like ginseng mixed in, while others might be garnished with chrysanthemum petals for fragrance and supposed cooling effects. Scholars still argue how much medicinal beliefs influenced primary recipes versus being a separate culinary adjunct. In your imaginary taste test, imagine a stew scented with cinnamon but tempered with sour plum vinegar, sweetened lightly with honey, and tingling with Sichuan pepper. The result is a dish that surprises your tongue, making you sit back and think about how much effort went into that flavor balance. These were times when food wasn't just food, it was art, science, and ritual rolled into one. You probably won't survive or thrive on the crocodile dung spice alone today. But the Tang Dynasty's adventurous seasoning methods laid foundations for much of modern Chinese cuisine's flavor complexity. So as you dig your chopsticks into a fragrant bowl of spiced meat or pick up a piece of honey-glazed duck, remember this: the Tang kitchen was part laboratory, part garden, and entirely devoted to pushing taste boundaries. Most importantly, it was fearless. You glide effortlessly from the aromatic depth of spices into the fascinating world of Tang Dynasty culinary tools and cooking techniques, because every bold flavor needs a bold method, and those ancient kitchens were a lot more sophisticated and inventive than you might guess. It's not just about the recipes, but how the magic was made, the pots, implements, and fires that transformed raw ingredients into sumptuous meals. Like a chef in today's kitchen, Tang cooks relied on a carefully selected arsenal of tools. Yet, some weren't just metal or wood, but inventive devices suited to the period's cooking needs. Woks, for example, are emblematic of Chinese cuisine, and though many people think they came later, similar concave pans existed during the Tang Dynasty, allowing cooks to stir-fry or deep-fry ingredients efficiently. The importance of wok-like pans is still debated. Historians aren't entirely sure if stir-frying was common then or developed mostly in later centuries. One fascinating device you'd notice immediately would be the variety of bamboo steamers stacked like little towers. Steaming was a popular method for preserving delicate flavors and nutrients, making food lighter and gentler on the palate. Steaming fish, buns, and vegetables was typical for Tang tables, especially in imperial kitchens where the emphasis was on refinement rather than heavy oils. And talking about heavy oils brings you to the early use of oil presses. Tang sources mention the production of oils from sesame seeds and soybean, extracted using wooden or stone presses. These oils were used both for cooking and as a lubricant for the wok or pans, a double duty that modern cooks could appreciate. Interestingly, Sesame oil's distinctive nutty aroma was highly prized, and some texts suggest it was reserved for nobility, a medieval gourmet snobbery of its own. The Tang kitchen also featured charcoal braziers and clay stoves designed to control heat carefully. Unlike the open hearths common across Europe at the time, Tang stoves allowed chefs much finer control over temperature and cooking times, crucial when preparing complex dishes. You'd expect intense heat for frying or roasting, but gentle embers for slow braises. An offbeat tidbit: archaeologists have unearthed small ceramic containers, believed to be used for flavor infusions, or maybe early forms of seasoning holders. You might think of these as the ancient equivalent of a spice rack. Some ceramic shards bear traces of chili oil and fermented sauces, providing a glimpse into storing complex flavored liquids. Of course, peppers were probably rare then, but mustard and other pungents made their way into these containers. Tang cooks likely mastered slow cooking, simmering stews for hours, an art that brought different meats and vegetables into harmonious tenderness. This was supplemented by quick techniques like pan roasting thin slices of meat over open flames, setting a rhythm of cooking that mixed patience with bursts of high heat. There are also hints about an early form of food slicing and carving tools that allowed cooks to cut ingredients very thinly. This precision in cuts is still key in Chinese cooking, affecting not only texture, but how flavors are absorbed. Historians debate how developed these knives were. Some suggest chefs may have wielded bronze blades with surprisingly fine edges, while others think iron cutting tools became commonplace, mostly in the later Song period. A quirky culinary gadget that appears in classical literature is the flavor wheel, a wooden rotating stand designed to hold small dishes of condiments and sauces near the dining table for convenient mixing, similar to today's Lazy Susan. The design symbolizes the creativity and ceremonial approach prized in Tang kitchens. Regarding the question of cookware materials, there's lively discussion about whether early Tang pots were predominantly ceramic or if metal cookware, like cast iron or bronze, was common. While ceramic was easy to produce and excellent for retaining heat, metal pans could tolerate higher temperatures and were used for frying. The archaeological record still gives us fragmentary evidence, so scholars pass through pottery shards and historical texts to piece together the puzzle. Tang kitchens were not just about harsh flames, simmering soups, and brewing medicinal teas were delicate procedures requiring specialized ladles and strainers. Bamboo ladles with long handles and fine mesh strainers made from woven threads or thin metal helped achieve this precision. Now, imagine standing by one of these stoves, watching a cook expertly tossing ingredients in a wok-like pan over a controlled flame, steam rising from the bamboo baskets stacked nearby, while a line of spices and sauces waits on the flavor wheel for final seasoning. The kitchen would be alight not only with heat, but with sounds: the soft crackle of flames, rhythmic chopping on wooden boards, and occasional bubbling from a simmering pot. Without the modern conveniences of temperature gauges or electric mixers, Tang chefs pushed their dexterity and physical intuition to the limit, truly the sensory masters of their art. They probably stressed about flare-ups and undercooked meats just like any chef today, except with a lot less cleanup detergent. The combination of these physical tools and culinary techniques allowed Tang cooks to experiment with textures and flavors ranging from crispy roasted duck skin to tender, fragrant steamed buns. This toolkit of stove design, cookware, and utensils was fundamental to the empire's gastronomic legacy. So next time you play with your frying pan or jostle your lids, tip a polite nod to those Tang Dynasty cooks who first balanced fire and flavor with such finesse, because history's kitchen gadgets laid the groundwork for every stir-fry and steam dumpling you love. As you step out of the sweltering kitchens and into the vibrancy of Tang-era marketplaces, the sensory explosion is immediate. The sharp tang of pickled vegetables mingling with sweet incense, merchants shouting over one another, and carts creaking under the weight of exotic and everyday goods. Here in these bustling hubs, the intricate network of ingredient sourcing for Tang kitchens comes alive, making you realize how connected urban life was even over 1,000 years ago. Tang marketplaces were sprawling affairs, often located near city gates or central squares, and formed a critical artery in the empire's culinary life. The range of goods displayed would astound even a modern food lover. Vibrant greens freshly plucked from nearby fields, freshly caught river fish still glistening with dew, fragrant herbs, plump fruits, and shimmering stalls carrying imported treasures like frankincense or rare spices from as far off as Central Asia. In fact, historians still argue whether the famed Silk Road's influence on Tang cuisine was a trickle or a flood, considering just how varied the ingredients were. You'd also find merchants specializing in more unusual items, such as crocodile skin used not for wallets, but oddly as an ingredient in medicinal soups, or dried insects like cicadas and beetles, which were sometimes ground into powders for flavoring or health tonics. These curious uses of unconventional seasonings hint at a culinary culture unafraid to stretch beyond your average vegetable and meat framework. The markets didn't only cater to the imperial kitchen, commoners also relied heavily on these open-air bazaars. Street vendors hawked quick bites, but more importantly, these stalls acted as supply centers for home cooks stocking up on staples like millet, soybeans, and fermented black beans. In fact, merchants often negotiated their prices based on the season. Early spring brought fresh shoots and vegetables, autumn was the time for new grains, and winter featured preserved foods to last the cold months. Ingredients didn't just come from local farms and forests. The Tang Empire's vast reach meant that sought-after spices and exotic foodstuffs arrived via imported trade. Ginger, garlic, and cinnamon traveled alongside silks and pottery, fulfilling both practical and opulent tastes. The secondary uses of some of these goods were pretty far out. For example, some spices doubled as natural insect repellents, a handy trick when food had to be stored for long journeys. One unusual tidbit comes from an old Tang poem describing vendors who sold golden bird eggs, probably referring to quail eggs that were considered a delicacy in urban centers, valued for their delicate taste and auspicious symbolism. You'd find these eggs carefully packed in paper or bamboo baskets and sold alongside other small, expensive goods. The organization of these markets was sophisticated. Different zones specialized in particular goods. One area might be devoted to fresh produce, while another was a hub for spices and preserved foods. Historians debate whether tax officials actively regulated food prices or quality in these markets. As some documents suggest, Government intervention was limited, potentially leading to fluctuating availability and prices that impacted common folks' diets. These marketplaces weren't only about commerce, they were social melting pots where poets, monks, officials, and farmers mingled. The scent of freshly baked sesame cakes would mingle with the crisp smell of dried ginseng, and the marketplace noise wasn't just haggling, but also vendors singing catchy jingles to draw customers. Early versions of marketing jingles you probably can't get out of your head. A fringe but fascinating aspect. Recent archaeological finds have uncovered small bronze mirrors in market stalls speculated to be used on merchants and buyers alike, not for grooming but to reflect sunlight into dark corners, acting like primitive flashlights to inspect goods in shaded areas. I like to think of Tang market vendors staging impromptu sales pitches aided by tiny rays bouncing off their mirrors. It's like a flashy episode of Ancient Market Idol. The supply routes to feed these markets were long and complex. Lakes and rivers served as natural highways for transporting fresh fish and vegetables. Caravans made the tough desert passages, bridging Central Asian outposts, bearing dried fruits and nuts. Horses, donkeys, and human porters labored tirelessly to keep the market shelves brimming, allowing Tang kitchens, both humble and imperial, to access a wealth of ingredients that fed the empire's vast population. Once harvested, ingredients were often sold quickly to prevent spoilage, but some vendors specialized in preserved foods. Salted fish, dried mushrooms, and pickled vegetables provided tang and substance during lean months. Techniques for preservation were state secrets in some imperial kitchens, but at the marketplace level, knowledge was widespread and adapted locally. Amusingly, some Tang-era regulations forbade the sale of certain luxury goods to commoners during festivals to prevent gastronomic envy from boiling over, though historians still argue how strictly these rules were enforced. Imagine a Tang street vendor cheekily hiding a prized truffle under a basket, giving you the side eye as you passed by, winking at the social hush-hush of the time. In all, these marketplaces were more than just points of trade. They were vibrant, chaotic crossroads where the Tang Empire's culinary ambitions met the practical needs of thousands of stomachs. You can almost smell the mingled aromas, feel the dusty dust of foot traffic on your sandals, and hear the lively cries of merchants as you imagine yourself lost in the maze of shimmering fabrics, tempting stalls, and the constant movement of a city fueled by taste. Shifting your focus from those bustling markets, you now wander the winding alleyways where the scents of sizzling food and steaming broths cling to the air like a favorite cloak. Here in the noisy chaos of Tang Dynasty streets, street food isn't just a happenstance snack. It's a vital culinary tradition weaving through daily life. The contrast between the humble fare of commoners and the imperial extravaganzas you glimpsed earlier couldn't be starker, yet both realms share threads of familiarity, simple ingredients transformed with skill and soul. Street vendors were the unsung heroes of Tang urban life, peddling everything from sticky rice cakes and fried dough twists to skewers of spiced meats cooked over open flames. Early morning stalls often laid out bundles of mung beans, dried tofu, freshly baked bread from small ovens, and steaming bowls of porridge thick with rice or millet. Imagine the ease and practicality. Quick, filling meals designed to fuel laborers, artisans, and travelers darting through the city's labyrinth. One particularly popular snack was yu tiao, a type of fried dough stick whose crisp exterior belied a tender, airy interior. This street food staple might sound humble, but it speaks volumes about the ingenuity of Tang cooks who could spin simple flour and oil into such addictive treats. Some scholars argue that such snacks laid the groundwork for China's later vibrant breakfast culture, a debate still lively among food historians. An odd but fascinating tidbit: archaeologists uncovered early references to dragon's beard candy in Tang records, thin, silky threads of spun sugar resembling a dragon's mane. Although of Middle Eastern origin, it had clearly won popularity among Tang commoners, winding its sweet way through street stalls. It was as much entertainment as treat, pulled and stretched expertly before the eyes of eager children and snackers. The social dynamics of street dining were just as rich as the flavors. Street food spots were democratic spaces where different social classes blurred, in stark contrast to the exclusivity of palace kitchens. You might spot a scholar sipping early tea alongside a street sweeper, all bonding briefly over bowls of hot noodles. Historians still argue how much street foods were regulated or taxed by Tang authorities, but sources imply a loosely controlled yet culturally embedded system. Street food aromas were a complex interlude. Pungent fermented tofu mingled with sweet aromatic spices, roasted peanuts cracking under tooth, and the earthy tang of pickled radishes. Vendors used clever cooking techniques to maximize flavor, steaming buns with juicy fillings sealed in the broth, or roasting meats to caramelized perfection with slight charring for smoky depth. The use of sesame seeds to add crunch and nuttiness was a well-loved flourish. You might also encounter oven-roasted chestnuts sold from portable cauldrons, their warm sweetness cutting through the cool autumn air. Tang people prized the seasonal nature of certain snacks, so food stalls adapted offerings accordingly: hot millet porridge on chilly mornings, chilled mung bean jelly in summer's heat. It's a culinary calendar painted onto street corners. Women frequently ran many street food stalls, adding a domestic charm and bustling energy to these makeshift kitchens. Their recipes often passed down through families, blending regional twists with universal comfort. Some women also doubled as herbalists, offering tonics alongside snacks, marrying nourishment with traditional healing beliefs. Food as medicine, accessible and immediate. Alongside the ubiquitous rice and millet, street foods occasionally featured wild foraged ingredients: bamboo shoots, wild greens, and even edible flowers, adding layers of texture and subtle aromas. Fringes of the empire brought less common items too. Think toasted locusts or cicadas tossed in salt and chili, a crunchy snack that might challenge a modern palate, but offered protein and surprise. Street food culture's very existence challenges the assumption that the Tang Dynasty was solely about imperial grandeur. It tells a story of daily survival, adaptation, and pleasure for the average person. The ability to grab a hot, flavorful bite between work or worship gave vitality to cities, turning streets into sensory experiences beyond simple transit. Now, for a quirky aside, some Tang poem fragments praise a mysterious vendor known as the Laughing Fritter Seller, famed for his humor and specialized fried dough balls flavored with sweet osmanthus juice. Whether this was a real person or a poetic allegory is debated, but such legends highlight how food vendors could rise to minor celebrity amongst locals. As you imagine the street food scene, Think of steam rising from clay pots, the rhythmic clatter of wooden chopsticks scraping bowls, and vendors calling out in sing-song voices, the soundtrack of nourishment and human connection. Interestingly, historians still argue whether street food fosters social cohesion or highlights class divides, though on Tang streets, the line blurred daily as people from all walks gathered around shared flavors. Between the scents, sounds, and sizzling oils, Tang street food offers not just sustenance, but a window into a lively, textured society where food was both necessity and celebration, even if you were unlikely to ever get a royal seat at the banquet. You push through the gentle haze of incense and lantern light, the mingled aromas of jasmine and scorched tea leaves filling the evening air. As day slips into night in Tang China, tea culture blossoms in complexity and ritual, weaving itself into the very fabric of daily life, and, intriguingly, into cooking itself. This was no simple steep and sip affair, but a refined art form entwined with social status, health, and even flavor innovation. The Tang Dynasty saw tea morph from a rustic herbal infusion into a symbol of cultural sophistication that touched all strata of society. You might find yourself seated in a bustling tea house, the clink of porcelain mingling with whispered conversation and the gentle pour of steaming water. The tea itself was often powdered and whisked, somewhat similar to later Japanese matcha ceremonies, though historians still argue whether this method or loose-leaf tea was more predominant during the Tang. Either way, tea was an obsession and a canvas where flavor and ceremony danced. Here's a quirky slice of tea lore. The legendary Lu Yu, often called the Sage of Tea, authored the classic of tea during the Tang era, a detailed treatise that blends botanical information with whimsical anecdotes. Legend says Lu Yu was orphaned and grew up barefoot, wandering through tea hills, his only possessions a teapot and a wisp of a smile. Whether fact or romantic fable, his teachings laid foundational stones for tea appreciation well beyond the Tang Dynasty. Tea was more than a table companion. It infiltrated the kitchen as an ingredient that elevated dishes. Chefs brewed tea-infused broths, delicate desserts, and even steamed buns subtly flavored to complement or contrast the boldness of imperial tea service. The use of jasmine or chrysanthemum tea leaves hints at a culinary experimentation that scholars still debate in terms of prevalence versus rarity. Social rituals around tea were a blend of etiquette, poetry, and medicine. Drinking tea was believed to harmonize internal energies, aid digestion, and stimulate alertness, an early kind of brain fuel that ancient herbalists praised. During elaborate tea ceremonies, hosts would adorn their offerings with carved tea cakes and scented blossoms, transforming the act into multi-sensory poetry. You might even sip rare teas pressed into artistic cakes or bricks, a form of both currency and culinary indulgence. Interestingly, you'd find tea shops not only serving drinks, but selling loose tea for home use, becoming hubs for social and even political exchange. Some urban tea houses featured performances and poetry readings, creating a cultural melange where food, drink, and art intertwined seamlessly. The chemistry of tea flavor is utterly intriguing. Some teas prized in Tang times came from wild forests, harvested with great care before imperial officials. The bitter, astringent notes, balanced with floral and sweet overtones, appealed to both palate and mind. Modern tasters note that Tang tea leaves often possessed a plum-like fragrance, a sensory note so elusive scholars are still trying to pinpoint its botanical origin. Tea also inspired a certain playful creativity in kitchen design. Imagine clay teapots, sculpted to mirror lotus flowers or dragons, with pouring spouts that sent water swirling like rivers. You might find portable tea sets nestled in silk-lined cases, accompanying travelers on the Silk Road, keeping the ritual alive across continents. Not everyone adored the rising tea culture, though. Some Confucian scholars lamented that its indulgence distracted from more virtuous pursuits, an age-old debate about luxury versus restraint that still echoes today. The intersection of tea as medicine, art, and sustenance made it a layered cultural phenomenon difficult to reduce to mere refreshment. A curious fringe tidbit. Some archaeological finds suggest that Tang chefs experimented with using fermented tea as a souring agent in pickles or marinades, a practice that links ancient kitchens to modern culinary twists. Could this be the precursor to your modern kombucha-inspired dishes? Historians still debate whether this was a widespread custom or isolated innovation. Stepping away from the tea house buzz, the influence of tea on social customs also extended to hospitality. Offering tea was a sign of respect, sometimes a delicate dance of negotiation or alliance building. 30 centuries before TikTok food trends, Tang tea culture set the stage for ceremonial food presentations and thoughtful eating etiquette. If you ever thought tea's magic stopped at the pot, the Tang kitchen whispers another story of shared sips and simmering pots, of steamed cakes and perfumed desserts, all unfolding alongside social rituals that bridged class and culture. Here, tea was not just a drink, but a language of taste, status, and well-being, steeped into every corner of Tang lives. The ink has barely dried on your last sip of jasmine tea when you find yourself leafing through the dusty pages of Tang Dynasty cookbooks, or at least what scholars have painstakingly reconstructed of them. This isn't your modern digital recipe scroll. It's delicate manuscripts, sometimes fragments filled with recipes, techniques, and snippets of culinary philosophy from an era that was proud of refining the art of eating. Tang Dynasty cookbooks are a fascinating bridge between oral tradition and written knowledge, where chefs elaborate on not just how to cook, but also why, offering insight into flavor pairings, ingredient sourcing, and even etiquette. Historians still argue whether these cookbooks were widely accessible or primarily restricted to the elite literati and imperial kitchens. What you do know is they were among the earliest culinary manuals in recorded history, setting a precedent long before similar texts appeared elsewhere. One of the most famous, though incomplete, examples is the Yinshan Zhengyao, attributed to the era's later years, offering a tantalizing snapshot of seasonal dishes, preserved techniques, and even medicinal applications of food. This work underlines how closely linked food and health were, blending the gustatory with the therapeutic. Imagine a section guiding you to prepare soups that can restore balance to the body, emphasizing harmony in flavors and ingredients, a concept still deeply rooted in Chinese food culture today. Here's a quirky tidbit. Many early Tang recipes were written in poetic verses or riddle-like couplets, making cooking sound like a musical performance rather than a mere kitchen chore. Some recipes demand the cook to pluck the jade green leaf when the moon is young, blending culinary instruction with cosmic timing. Talk about timing your roast to the lunar cycle. Who needs a microwave timer when you have astrology? The preservation of these cookbooks is itself a mystery. Buried in the sands, hidden in imperial archives, fragmented by years of change and rebellion, these texts survived in pieces. Modern scholars, the kind who peek behind historical curtains, debate whether the surviving recipes represent imperial cuisine exclusively or if they capture common culinary practices of diverse social classes as well. The cookbooks describe a symphony of ingredients ranging from the everyday to the exotic. They mention everything from white pepper and star anise to mysterious grains that scholars believe may have been ancient varieties now lost to agriculture. This gives you a hint of how culinary globalization was already happening back then, tracing ingredient routes along the Silk Road. One fascinating entry describes dragonfish, an ambiguous term still debated today, which might refer to a rare freshwater species or a fanciful name for a prized delicacy. The true identity remains elusive, reminding you that kitchens then had their own culinary mysteries, just like your favorite food trucks. Some recipes insist you must use fresh spring water, ideally collected under auspicious signs, to cook perfect rice or noodles. While it sounds a bit mystical, this practice reflects the real importance of water quality and seasonality in food preparation. You don't want your noodles swimming in anything less than auspicious, after all. Tang cookbooks also hint at early experimentation with fermentation, pickling, and curing techniques, with instructions passed down both orally and in ink. Some scholars argue these writings laid the groundwork for the later development of fermented soy products like soy sauce, which transformed Chinese cooking forever. Another eyebrow-raising historical, literal spice comes from a passage describing heaven's laughter grain, possibly an ancient form of pepper or chili. The introduction of chili peppers to China is a historical puzzle itself, with some suggesting the Tang era as the earliest guess for their arrival, even though most evidence points to a much later date. Historians still debate whether this is a metaphor or a misunderstood reference to spice. The cookbooks also caution about the dangers of certain ingredients, like advising against overconsumption of fire beans, lest you be overcome with heat or fever. This is where the overlap between culinary art and traditional medicine becomes starkly apparent. Cooking wasn't just about taste, but also about maintaining vital bodily equilibrium. Decorative aspects of food are given special attention, with descriptions of carving vegetables into lotus petals or sculpting dough into symbolic animals for festive meals. This aesthetic sense creates not only visual but sensory narratives on the table, a practice that endures in Chinese culinary art even today. Despite the daunting weight of history, some Tang culinary wisdom is surprisingly user-friendly. Tips for preserving dumpling dough or preparing noodles with just the right elasticity pop up repeatedly. It's almost as if these ancient pages whisper their secrets to you, revealing that after a millennium, the kitchen remains a timeless place of discovery and delight. The fact that these ancient texts included portions to scale ingredients, albeit sometimes poetically described, suggests an early understanding of precision in the culinary arts. While the exact measurements can be debated, it's a reminder that cooking has long been a blend of science and grace. One charming footnote is the use of tea paper as a wrapper for certain delicacies, a practice that adds texture and fragrance to the dish. It's as if tea's influence extends beyond brew and bites, touching even presentation. If you ever think Tang Dynasty cooking was all about rigid formality, these surviving cookbooks suggest something more playful and experimental. A kitchen alive with curiosity and seasonal adaptation. So, amidst the poems and prescriptions, you glimpse the heart of a thriving culinary culture bridging art, science, and sensual pleasure. You step out of the warm kitchen and into the cool shade of a Tang marketplace, where everything you see hints at the secret science of food preservation, an ancient art that kept Tang kitchens stocked through seasons of scarcity and plenty. Without refrigerators humming in the background, cooks had to rely on techniques like drying, salting, smoking, and fermenting to extend the life of perishables. It's almost like they invented their own version of time travel, letting ingredients leap through months without spoiling. Historians still argue whether these preservation methods were mostly practical solutions for the common folk or sophisticated knowledge closely guarded and refined by imperial chefs. What's certain is that some of their techniques eventually blossomed into staples of Chinese cuisine and inspired preservation methods across the globe. Imagine you're holding a chunk of salted fish or a carefully dried mushroom. Each bite carries not just flavor, but centuries of survival wisdom. The classic method of drying is well documented. Tang cooks hung meats and vegetables in sunny, breezy spots, probably above their heads to avoid curious critters, until all the moisture evaporated. This was more than just ancient dehydration, drying concentrated flavors and textures that modern gourmets still crave. You get the crunch of dried bamboo shoots or the chewy, intensified character of salted duck, which was a prized delicacy and portable protein source. Salt, of course, was the star of preservation. It's no coincidence that salt mines and salt taxes were pivotal to the Tang economy. Salted pork belly was a common staple stored in pottery jars, sealed tight to keep moisture low and flavor high. Scholars are still debating whether salt curing techniques originated in coastal or inland regions first, highlighting the diversity of Tang China's vast territories. Talking of salt brings up an aromatic curiosity: smoked and salted duck glazed with honey, a recipe hinted at in some Tang texts. The combination of smoke's bitterness, salt's bite, and honey's sweetness created a flavor profile that's still influential today, especially in Cantonese cuisine centuries later. You might call it the ancestor of modern barbecued ducks, but back then it had a more intimate, almost ritualistic reverence. Fermentation, meanwhile, was more than a clever trick. It was a gateway to new textures and flavors. Soybeans, for example, began to be transformed through fermentation into early forms of soy sauce and fermented bean pastes. You can imagine the patient wait required, fermenting months in earthenware jars buried underground, the slow chemical dance making sauces that elevated even simple grains to culinary stars. A fringe but tantalizing theory suggests that the Tang kitchens experimented with alcoholic fermentations beyond just rice wine, possibly creating early vinegars and flavoring agents. Some speculate that these experiments laid the groundwork for the depth and complexity that Chinese culinary fermentation would boast in later dynasties. Food preservation was a necessity for festival cooking too. Tang-era celebrations often included dishes prepared weeks in advance, preserved carefully to maintain peak freshness or flavor. You can picture a family or palace staff wrapping pickled vegetables in bamboo leaves or curing meats in salted brine, all to show up at the Lunar New Year with impressive, delicious spreads. So now, one fun, somewhat quirky tradition was using clay pots sealed with a mixture of mud and rice husks, which not only protected preserved foods but also imparted subtle, earthy notes to the contents. This is a literal earthy flavor you wouldn't get from metal containers, contributing uniquely to Tang tastes. Imagine telling your friends about your mud-sealed stew with a straight face. Tang cooks also use sugar as a means of preservation. Think candied fruits or sweet glazes. While sugar was expensive, its dual role as a flavor enhancer and preservative made it a luxurious addition in banquet dishes. It's part of why so many Tang desserts had that balance of sweet and tang that seems oddly familiar, even to modern palates. Interestingly, drying and preserving techniques extended beyond food to herbs and spices essential for Tang gastronomy. Some recipes call for powdered herbs sprinkled on dishes, indicating they stored and transported flavor in powdered, stabilized forms, rather like your modern-day pantry staples. Preservation went hand in hand with seasoning. Salted fish and pickled vegetables weren't just stored foods, they were vital flavor catalysts in feasts. Both imperial banquets and humble meals utilized these preserved goods to add depth on short notice, turning simple rice and noodles into festive fare. Historically, some preserved foods held ritual significance. For example, dried lotus seeds and water chestnuts weren't just ingredients but symbolic gifts exchanged during festivals. Their preservation ensured they could be transported over distances without spoilage, reinforcing cultural connections across far-flung Tang regions. Despite all this ingenuity, historians still debate how widely preserved foods were consumed outside the imperial courts. Did common folks have access to delicacies like salted duck or fermented bean sauces, or were these mostly reserved for elites? Some anthropological studies suggest preservation techniques differed greatly between urban centers and rural villages, reflecting socio-economic divides. You might also find it amusing that some preserved foods had quirky nicknames. One commonly referenced salty fish was called wind meat because it was dried outdoors, exposed to all kinds of breezes, though some say the name was a poetic euphemism for its pungent aroma. And speaking of smells, you probably won't survive the olfactory overload if you walked straight into a Tang marketplace. Imagine the mingling scents of dried herbs, fermenting bean pastes, sweet smoky meats, and fresh produce, all competing and collaborating in an ancient sensory bouquet. By mastering preservation, Tang cooks effectively flatten time, storing summer's bounty for winter's gloom, festival treats for ordinary days, and adding layers of complexity to each meal. These innovations laid down roots that nourished not just China, but the evolving tastes of the entire Silk Road and beyond. As you tuck a small packet of dried chrysanthemum petals into your pocket, imagine they were used both for tea and as a natural preservative. You realize that the ancient kitchen secrets are never really lost. They merely wait to enrich your understanding one bite at a time. The buzz of Tang Dynasty life pulses through the festivals that punctuate the calendar, each one a vibrant celebration framed by specific foods, lovingly prepared and often laden with symbolism. You, standing among a throng of revelers, catch the sense of spiced meats roasting over open fires, sweet cakes stacked high, and steaming bowls of dumplings that promise warmth against the fading chill of winter. Historians still argue whether these festival foods originated as religious offerings or communal sharing rituals, but what's undeniable is that seasonal celebrations became a cornerstone of Tang culinary culture. Each festival had its own signature dishes, some tied intimately to the agricultural year and imperial traditions. Start with the Lunar New Year, the grandest and most important festival in Tang, China, where families and courts alike prepared food for luck, health, and prosperity. Tang cooks crafted glutinous rice cakes, or niangao, which, by the way, literally means year high, symbolizing growth and progress. You can imagine the sticky rice dough being pounded rhythmically, the kitchen filled with the earthy warmth of steamed treats. And don't forget dumplings, shaped like ancient Chinese gold ingots to invoke wealth. They weren't just food, but edible talismans. Just be careful not to bite into one and find a lucky coin hidden inside, unless you want an unexpectedly crunchy fortune. As the seasons spun on, the Mid-Autumn Festival called for mooncakes, round pastries with intricate designs whose sweet, dense fillings held secrets about family unity and harvest thanks. These treats encapsulated the idea of reunion and fullness, echoing the full moon that illuminated the autumn sky. You can almost hear the chatter by lantern light, exchanging mooncakes instead of just texts. Tang records describe regional variations on mooncakes, including some savory versions stuffed with meat or nuts, emphasizing how local tastes flavored even the most widespread traditions. The mooncake you're picturing might differ vastly depending on where you stood in the sprawling empire. Another festival, the Double Ninth, or Chongyang Festival, celebrated on the 9th day of the 9th lunar month, was famously connected to appreciation of chrysanthemums and careful aging. Chrysanthemum wine and chrysanthemum cakes featured prominently in the culinary rituals of the day. Remember how you stumbled on those dried chrysanthemum petals back in the preservation section? Well, here they bloom into festive significance. Manufacturing and storing these seasonal specialties required skill. Many were made in advance using those preservation techniques you now know well, pickling, drying, and fermenting, to ensure the foods lasted through long celebrations and reached guests far from the capital. Long-distance transport was no joke in the Tang era. You wouldn't want your mooncake arriving stale at the festival table. Curiously, some festival foods serve dual purposes as both nourishment and medicine. The Tang diet often links certain seasonal foods with balancing the body's qi and countering the changing climate. For example, spicy chilies, which were rare and exotic during early Tang times, were sometimes included in winter dishes for their warming properties, while cooling cucumbers excelled in summer feasts. Historians debate the extent to which imported spices like pepper or cinnamon were used in festival cooking, but it's clear that Tang chefs eagerly embraced new flavors through expanding trade networks, including the fabled Silk Road. Imagine spices arriving from lands as far as India or Arabia to mingle with local herbs, elevating customary festival fare. Take the example of the Lantern Festival, marking the end of Chinese New Year festivities. Popular sweets like tang yuan, glutinous rice balls, often filled with sweet sesame or red bean paste, were served. These symbolize family togetherness and coming full circle. The tactile pleasure of chewing soft, sticky tang yuan filled with warm filling was as crucial then as scrolling through your phone's dessert photos now. Some Tang poets waxed lyrical about festival foods, immortalizing the atmosphere of sharing and joy. Their verses pictured delicious meals and the sounds of laughter blending with fire crackling and musical flutes. You might feel smug knowing you're tasting history that inspired art. A quirky tradition from some records reveals that at certain festivals, cooks prepared ghost cakes or offerings intended for ancestral spirits, often small rice cakes or fruit arranged neatly on altar tables, while just ritual offerings to most. Some folks apparently nibbled these ghost cakes later, which feels a bit like salvaging leftovers after a dinner party. Seasonal foods moved beyond the big festivals to more localized celebrations as well. For instance, harvest festivals in specific provinces featured corn-based or millet-based dishes, reflecting the crops available in those regions. The diversity of Tang Empire meant a kaleidoscope of culinary celebrations, each stamped with local identity. Interestingly, some foods from Tang festivals carried symbolic meanings that still resonate today. Lotus roots, rice dumplings, and citrus fruits were not just tasty bites, but talismans of fertility, wealth, and renewal. Their inclusion in festival meals underscores a deep awareness of food's power beyond mere sustenance. One of the more intriguing customs was the medicine food, served during festivals to ward off illness and boost strength as the seasons changed. For example, a spicy herbal broth infused with ginger, jujube, and ginseng might be served during winter celebrations to fortify the body against cold wind and dampness. This blending of medicine and festivity made purely celebratory foods part healing potion. Also fascinating is the Lingsha festival, dedicated to spring blossoms and ephemeral beauty, where edible flowers like peony petals might have been candied or steeped in teas, playfully combining aesthetics with taste, a far cry from your usual flower arrangements. Food offered during festivals wasn't always eaten on site. Gift giving was a huge part of the ritual, with delicacies packed in ornate boxes to be carried long distances. Historians debate how much of a logistical challenge this was, but the sheer volume of preserved goods, including dried fruits and salted fish, suggests well-oiled transport systems existed even then. Festival cooking energized social bonds. Beyond the dining table, food prep was communal. Neighbors, workers, and families all contributed, mixing flavors and rhythms in a choreography of tradition. The cooking scenes were as much about fellowship as flavor. You probably won't survive the sheer scale of festival food prep if you tried to record every dish served at the Tang imperial court during the 12 months of festivities. It's like binge-watching food shows on steroids, only with people wearing silk robes and no commercial breaks. By linking food and festival, Tang China fused sensory delight with social meaning. Each bite carried the weight of culture, aspiration, and history, connecting past to present in the most delicious of ways. As the vibrant celebrations of festivals fade into the everyday hum of Tang Dynasty life, you step into a quieter, more intimate corner of the culinary world, the role of women in the kitchen. You might think about kitchens as bustling male-dominated domains, especially in grand imperial settings, but the Tang era paints a surprisingly nuanced picture. Women were neither mere bystanders nor just consumers. They were active creators, preservers, and innovators within the culinary tradition. Women's roles in cooking during the Tang period spanned social strata, from the palace maids serving the emperor's banquets to peasants preparing daily meals in modest hearths. Historians still argue whether elite women participated directly in imperial kitchen operations or merely supervised, but evidence suggests women's influence extended beyond the hearth to shaping culinary culture itself. In noble households, women were often tasked with managing the household's food provisions, selecting ingredients, organizing storage, and ensuring meals were prepared according to both taste and ritual requirements. You can picture a Tang noblewoman, elegantly draped in silk, overseeing the preparation of a complex banquet, making sure each dish conveyed the appropriate symbolism, like a master conductor in a culinary symphony. On the other end of the social ladder, peasant women bore the brunt of daily cooking labor, grinding grain into flour, fermenting vegetables for shelf life, and stirring hearty soups that sustained their families. Their culinary expertise was as vital as a well-oiled plow in producing food, a labor-intensive endeavor demanding both skill and resilience. You probably won't survive a day shadowing a Tang peasant woman in the kitchen. The work was not only physically demanding, but time-consuming, a never-ending cycle of tending fires, grinding, washing, and managing limited resources. Their kitchens were smaller, humble, often smoky corners within thatched homes, quite a contrast to the smell of incense and exotic spices wafting through palace halls. Beyond domestic kitchens, women also emerged as street food vendors and market traders. Street markets were lively, colorful, and noisy places, and female vendors brought homemade snacks, cooked and sold fresh with flair. It's quirky to imagine that the precursors to modern night market stalls might have been run by women balancing woks on their backs, a tradition perhaps stretching back over a millennium. Literary sources and poetry occasionally celebrate women's culinary skills as a reflection of their virtue and care. Tang poet Yu Xuanji, one of the few authentic female voices from the period, mentions food and domestic settings with a unique blend of sensuality and pragmatism. Her poems hint at an intimate knowledge of cooking and a subtle rebellion against the expectations placed on women. However, the broader societal view of women's kitchen roles reveals complexity. Confucian ideals, which emphasized hierarchical family roles, often constrained women's public participation in culinary arts beyond household management. Yet, paradoxically, the kitchen was one of the few socially acceptable domains for women's creativity and influence, giving them an ambivalent but undeniable form of power. Women also played a critical role in passing down kitchen knowledge. Oral tradition and apprenticeships within families were key to preserving recipes, techniques, and food lore. Without these hidden repositories of culinary wisdom, much of Tang food culture might have been lost. You can almost hear a grandmother whispering secrets about the perfect seasoning or the right moment to remove dumplings from boiling water. Another significant aspect was women's involvement in food preservation. Pickling, drying, and fermenting were often entrusted to female hands. Managing these staples was essential not only for household survival during scarce seasons, but also for maintaining the textures and flavors cherished in Tang cuisine. The women's expertise in fermentation reminds you of the patience involved in turning humble cabbage or soybeans into celebrated delicacies. In certain religious contexts, women performed roles tied to food rituals, such as preparing offerings on altars or during festivals. You might find an intriguing overlap of culinary and spiritual duties here, where the boundary between food and faith blurred, and women mediated that connection through ritual meals. The debate among scholars about women's visibility in historical records remains lively. Some argue that the historical silence about women's kitchen contributions reflects bias rather than absence, pointing to indirect evidence like inventories of dowries containing cooking utensils or tomb murals depicting women in kitchen scenes. These traces expand your understanding, insisting that women were central, even if their stories were rarely told outright. In addition to cooking and domestic responsibilities, some elite women authored or influenced early culinary texts and herbology guides, bridging food and medicine. You might recall the earlier notes about medicinal foods. Many were prepared under women's supervision to nurture family health. The blending of culinary and healing arts further positions women as custodians of holistic well-being. A quirky footnote you might appreciate. Certain aristocratic women, known for their refined palates, reportedly maintain secret recipes or controlled exclusive spices, guarding these culinary treasures as jealously as any political secret. The idea of code recipes guarded behind silk screens feels charmingly anachronistic, like an ancient version of a celebrity chef's secret sauce. The question remains, did women have opportunities to assert themselves as professional chefs or restaurateurs? Tang China certainly had specialized cooks and food businesses, but whether women were proprietors is murky. Some fragments suggest that female-run tea houses or eateries existed, providing social spaces where women could indirectly influence food culture beyond home kitchens and market stalls. You may be surprised to learn that the Tang also had courtesans, skilled not only in music and poetry, but also in culinary arts. Their social roles sometimes extended to hosting and organizing elaborate meals, blending gastronomy with cultural performance, a fusion of art and appetite that underlines the diversity of women's engagement with food. In sum, the Tang Dynasty's kitchen was as much a female domain as a male one, albeit with differing visibility and social implications. Women shaped food culture through cooking, preservation, ritual, teaching, and even commerce, quietly steering the empire's culinary currents behind the scenes. Imagine that next time you heat a midnight snack, somewhere deep in history, a woman crafted dishes with the same care, patience, and creativity, connecting past and present with every simmer and stir. Medicine meets cuisine. This seamless blend defined much of Tang Dynasty food culture, softly blurring the line between what you eat and what heals you. As you lean into this concept, imagine kitchens where aromatic stews bubble gently next to herb-infused potions, where the chef's knowledge stretched beyond recipes into the realm of prescribed cures. The Tang era witnessed a burgeoning intersection of gastronomy and traditional Chinese medicine, turning every meal into a potentially balanced health ritual. You're likely aware that traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, teaches food is more than calories. It's energy, essence and balance, yin and yang dancing on your tongue, aligning your inner elements. But during the Tang, this wasn't just theoretical. Food and medicine were often indistinguishable. What you ate was a deliberate act of health maintenance or restoration. Historians still argue whether this conception primarily rose from elite medical texts or popular wisdom, but what's clear is that the kitchen was a quasi-pharmacy. Ancient texts from the Tang period frequently list recipes intended to treat specific ailments: ginger and honey to soothe coughs, lotus root to strengthen the lungs, or red dates to revitalize blood. These weren't just culinary suggestions, but medical prescriptions wrapped in edible form. You almost expect an imperial chef to wear a stethoscope if it wasn't for those elaborate silk robes hogging all the attention. What's fascinating is that foods were classified by their temperature properties: warming, cooling, neutral, and their flavor profiles, which TCM linked to bodily organs and functions. A cooling dish might calm a fever, while a warming one could invigorate you after a long winter. This functional approach went far beyond flavor or nutrition. It was about orchestrating harmony within your body's ecosystem. You may chuckle at the quirky side. Some recipes recommended using animal parts for mystical effects, bear paws for strength, or snake meat for agility, and yet these ideas mingled with surprisingly modern concepts like antioxidants long before the term was coined. The borderline eccentricity of these ingredients could make a 21st century foodie's head spin, but they were prized delicacies for Tang dietitians. The blending of medicine and cuisine also influenced the etiquette and timing of meals, incorporating notions of seasonality tied to health. For example, in winter, dishes would emphasize warmth and richness, while spring diets featured lighter, detoxifying foods to cleanse and prepare the body for renewal. This cyclical approach feels akin to switching from pumpkin spice lattes to iced matcha drinks, but deeply philosophical and ritualistic. Women's roles in preparing medicinal meals further underscore their custodial importance. Not only were they crafting flavors, but they were enforcing wellness regimens according to family health needs. Remember from before how women preserve food? That intimate knowledge of ingredients naturally extended to medicinal properties, making them informal dietitians long before modern nutritionists. You might be intrigued by the emergence of specialized food therapy practitioners and books during the Tang, some penned by renowned physicians who advocated integrating culinary arts within medical care. Diet was not an afterthought, but a pillar of health management. Some historians argue whether these texts influenced common folks' cooking or remained elite prescriptions, but they undeniably shaped imperial and aristocratic food choices. Among the herbal ingredients cherished for their healing qualities were ginseng, revered as a vitality booster, goji berries seen as eye tonics, and chrysanthemum flowers brewed into teas that calmed nerves. These ingredients, sometimes supplemented by honey or vinegar, featured simultaneously in kitchens and apothecaries, blurring spaces where food was made and medicine dispensed. You might raise an eyebrow at how some Tang-era remedies included crocodile dung, an ingredient believed to protect skin from sunburn and aging. While definitely not a kitchen staple, it exemplifies the quirky extremes intersecting food, beauty, and wellness practices. Hopefully it stayed well away from the steamy bowls of congee eaten by your average diner. In festival contexts, too, food and medicine intertwined. Special dishes were prepared to ward off evil spirits or illness, reflecting communal hopes for longevity and health. Eating well was an act of social and spiritual fidelity, not just personal nourishment. Philosophically, the Tang thinkers embraced the idea that body and environment coexisted holistically. The air you breathed, your diet, sleep patterns, and emotions worked in tandem. Foods contributed to this balance, making the kitchen an ecological node, not just a place to satisfy hunger. The introduction of Buddhism and Taoism further populated medicinal culinary ideas. Buddhist vegetarian cuisine, for example, emphasized purity and life preservation, leading to the creation of plant-based dishes believed to confer spiritual as well as physical benefits. You can almost taste the peaceful harmony intended to come through every bite. And then there's the debate. Historians still argue whether the integration of medicine and cuisine was driven primarily by medical theorists or gradually evolved from folk traditions. Some suggest an early form of holistic nutrition, while others see a symbolic or mystical overlay somewhat detached from practical daily eating habits. This uncertainty invites you to imagine the kitchen as a laboratory experimenting with tastes and remedies all at once. Looking across the centuries, you see how this Tang legacy stakes a claim on modern food trends obsessing over superfoods, functional eating, and gut health. The ancient medical-cum-culinary symbiosis feels like the precursor to today's wellness culture, only with fewer kale smoothies and more elaborate stews. In closing, when you next sip soothing herbal tea or enjoy a bowl of broth simmered with medicinal herbs, you're unknowingly participating in an ancient tradition, echoing kitchens where healers and chefs were one and the same. The Tang Dynasty's kitchens weren't just places of pleasure, they were sanctuaries where nourishment and healing flowed from the same pot. Regional influences and diversity stretch like the vast lands of Tang China itself, where geography, culture, and climate painted the culinary landscape with a kaleidoscope of flavors. You're not just sitting down to eat. No, you're traveling through valleys and plateaus, crossing rivers and deserts without leaving your seat. The Tang Empire was a sprawling mosaic, and its foods reflected that stunning diversity, making its kitchens as colorful as they were complex. Imagine the northern plains with their hearty, wheat-based staples, thick noodles and steamed buns filling hungry mouths amid cold winds. Up north, millet and barley were king. The colder climate demanded substantial fare to keep the body warm through those long winters. Meanwhile, if you picture southern China, the subtropical climes invited rice paddies and abundant vegetables, giving the cuisine a lighter, fresher profile. Historians still argue whether these regional cuisines mixed widely during the Tang or retained sharp boundaries, but trade and travel certainly encouraged some blending. In the western borderlands, like the area around present-day Xinjiang, spice routes flung open new horizons, bringing lamp-lit nights filled with the scent of cumin, coriander, and exotic dried fruits. These tastes traveled alongside silk and gold, making kitchens on the empire's edge a chemical cauldron of Central Asian influences. It's like your taste buds took a mini trip down the Silk Road without jet lag. Coastal regions didn't lag either. Seafood was abundant, from succulent river fishes to salt-cured delights sailed in from the East China Sea. Tang people were sophisticated diners, appreciating everything from seaweed salads to shellfish steamed to perfection. This maritime abundance likely expanded the boundaries of palatable food, though historians still debate how widespread seafood consumption really was among inland populations. Speaking of fusion, Tang-era cooking frequently absorbed cultural and ethnic imprints. Think of the vibrant Uyghur communities in the Northwest introducing skewered meats, or the Korean and Vietnamese neighbors with their unique fermenting practices subtly influencing the empire's kitchens. Some scholars believe that the ethnically diverse court itself requested rare dishes to remind them of faraway homelands, kind of like a royal food nostalgia. Many of these diverse ingredients and methods were documented in culinary treatises and travel logs, reinforcing the reality that the Tang foodscape was dynamic. It wasn't static, flicker-like snapshots of tradition. It was a living collage nourished and transformed by trade, conquest, migration, and religion. The emperor's chefs prided themselves on this repertoire, combining fresh local produce with spices and techniques from distant provinces. You might find it quirky that some regional specialties included rather unexpected tastes, such as fermented soybean pastes from the south or pungent alliums from other regions. These distinct flavors could be polarizing, like early versions of durian or blue cheese, treasured locally but confounding to outsiders. The existence of these niche preferences reminds us that culinary comfort zones existed even back then. While the imperial kitchens often sought to unify these offerings into palatable, cosmopolitan slices of empire, commoners' plates told varied stories depending on locality. A peasant in Sichuan might enjoy spicy, chili-infused dishes vastly different from the mild soups favored in the northern steppes. Food was as much a cultural identifier as language or dress. Religions also shaped regional kitchens. Buddhist vegetarianism gained footholds, influencing eastern regions especially. Taoist alchemists experimented with herbs and food symbolism, further inflecting local menus with spiritual flavors. Historians still argue about which religious or spiritual practices had the greatest impact on food choices across different territories during this period. An interesting historical tidbit is the spread of certain crops during the Tang Dynasty that redefined regional foodways. For example, chili peppers, though not native to China, were introduced through trade networks toward the end of the dynasty, reportedly transforming southwestern flavors. The timing remains debated, but the notion brings home how regional cuisines kept evolving and adopting foreign elements even within this era. You may chuckle to picture how some warring tribal guests might have been served their ancestral delicacies at court, exact replicas of rural dishes painstakingly prepared by imperial cooks. The empire's cuisine was simultaneously an expression of dominance and a nod to cultural pluralism, a culinary diplomatic hand extended across ethnic divides. The vastness of the empire meant ingredient access varied dramatically. Mountain communities relied on wild game and foraged herbs. River valleys grew rice and vegetables. Desert oases traded dried meats and grains. This resourcefulness gave rise to robust regional identities, bound by geography and environment. Interestingly, on the fringes of empire, Kitchens incorporated nomadic practices, preserving meats in unique ways, or preparing game with simple fire techniques, providing a striking contrast to the delicate stir-fries and steamed buns of urban centers. These culinary juxtapositions now feel like snapshots of an empire's heartbeat, throbbing with diversity. This regional culinary variety influenced social life too. Traveling officials sampled local specialties during their circuits, sometimes importing popular delicacies back to the capital. Food became a vehicle for cultural exchange and political cohesion, albeit a slow-cooked one. At the same time, urban centers like Chang'an, modern Xi'an, functioned as melting pots. The city's legendary markets and eateries showcased an extraordinary array of dishes from every corner of the empire. You'd have found yourself overwhelmed by choices, from the spicy noodles of Sichuan to the sweet pastries of the eastern coast, all squeezed into one vibrant street. Trade routes, especially the Silk Road, were arteries pumping exotic ingredients and novel culinary ideas into Chinese kitchens. You can almost smell those mingling scents of cinnamon, saffron, sesame, and peppercorns drifting on the breeze, a fragrant reminder of the empire's openness to outside influences. This culinary cosmopolitanism contributed to fostering a shared identity, even as regional pride remained strong. Historians debate the extent to which regional cuisines were preserved versus homogenized under imperial influence, a fascinating question reflecting ongoing tensions between unity and diversity. So dining in Tang China was never just about flavor. It was an experience woven from geography, politics, culture, and social dynamics. The empire was a patchwork quilt of tastes, stitched together by tradition and innovation alike. As you imagine sitting down with a bowl of hearty northern noodles followed by delicate southern rice cakes, remember you're channeling a centuries-old journey where every bite carried stories of land, people, and empire. The Tang Dynasty's regional flavors remind us how food can be a passport, inviting you to traverse time and space without moving from your seat. Legacy and Lost Recipes today offers you a bittersweet stroll through time, where the scents and tastes of Tang China's kitchens often slip through our fingers like grains of ancient millet. It's like trying to catch smoke with chopsticks. Many dishes from that dazzling era live only in texts or faded memories, while others evolved or vanished under the tides of history. But don't despair, for Tang cuisine's legacy still ghost walks through modern China's culinary corridors, waiting for aficionados and chefs to trace its delicate outlines. You've likely heard about the famed Tang Dynasty poem on food, which immortalized certain delicacies and inspired generations, yet many specifics remain vague. Even some imperial recipes referenced in surviving manuscripts, while tantalizingly detailed, present researchers with puzzles that are difficult to decipher fully. Historians still argue how authentic the replicated recipes are, given ingredient availability and shifts in culinary techniques over the centuries. Take, for example, a luscious dragon beard candy, or the exotic combination of meats and spices believed to be served at Tang banquets. These dishes often incorporated ingredients like camphor or processed meats that modern cooks find puzzling or unpalatable. Some recipes call for now obsolete herbs or cooking methods that defy practical kitchen setup today. The fact that many ingredients, such as certain spices or meats, were imported or seasonal complicates, attempts to recreate authentic flavors. You may be fascinated to learn that some dishes passed down through Chinese regional cuisines bear surprising resemblance to those described in Tang culinary texts. Sichuan's famous dishes, with their emphasis on bold flavors and chili heat, hint at earlier Tang influences or even imperial tastes shifting into local traditions. The great spread of chili peppers, which you encountered in the previous section, played a part of this heritage, though ironically these peppers arrived relatively late, gradually transforming what might have originally been milder palates. Modern chefs and food historians have taken up the challenge to resurrect Tang flavors, experimenting in kitchens that blend historical research, forensics, and imaginative adaptation. It's a bit like culinary archaeology, hoping that by combining the right ingredients and tools, they can evoke at least a shadow of the original experience. Some experimental banquets and museum exhibits attempt to transport diners back a millennium, though the experience remains an approximation at best. One quirky tidbit involves a recent revival of a soup from the Tang period, based on detailed textual descriptions, mentioning all kinds of ingredients ranging from lotus roots to jujubes and various meats cooked together. The recipe is complex enough that few modern cooks dare try it without adjustments, and debates rage among scholars about whether it was a daily staple or ceremonial dish. Such uncertainty underscores how culinary knowledge is transmitted unevenly and often interrupted by social upheavals. It's worth noting that most cooking manuals from the Tang era, recovered or referenced by historians, tend to emphasize method and philosophy over rigid recipes, a far cry from today's step-by-step guides. This approach suggests that many cooks had to rely on intuition and apprenticeship rather than strict adherence to texts, which makes the hunt for exact lost recipes a tricky business. An open scholarly debate lingers about how much continuity exists between Tang cuisine and subsequent dynasties' fare. Some argue that the grand banquet traditions faded during the Ming and Qing periods, which favored different regional ingredients and aesthetics, while others suggest that the culinary DNA persisted, subtly influencing later tastes. Regardless, Tang food culture stands as a magnificent ancestor, foundational even if not always directly visible. You may get a chuckle from how some lost ingredients or preparations sound bizarre to modern palates, like the use of crocodile dung as sunscreen in other contexts. Okay, no one put that in their soup, but historically strange flavor pairings and preservation methods sometimes bordered on the eccentric or experimental. Further complicating the revival are linguistic challenges. Terms in ancient cookbooks sometimes mean different things today, or the original ingredient has multiple modern substitutes, muddling attempts at authentic replication. The poetry of the texts sometimes leaves room for interpretation, making the revival as much an art as a science. Yet the culinary legacy lives vibrantly in other ways, through popular foods traced to Tang-era origins, regional dishes flavored by centuries-old tastes, and in cultural memories kept alive by festival meals. For example, certain traditional pastries and noodle recipes still echo imperial culinary customs, grounding the present in the past. Some restaurants pride themselves on Tang fusion menus, blending old motifs with modern flair. Unexpectedly, some modern food trends trace back to Tang culinary spirit, such as the fusion of spicy and sweet elements, or the open-minded embrace of foreign spices introduced along the Silk Road. This global openness was arguably one of Tang's most lasting contributions to Chinese food culture. In exploring this legacy, you get a glimpse not only of what was lost, but also what endures. A tantalizing reminder that food history is a living, breathing tapestry woven from centuries of adaptation, transformation, and creativity. So, as you sip a steaming bowl of noodles flavored with a mix of traditional spices, remember that with each bite, you're sharing an ancestral table with chefs and diners from over 1,000 years ago. Their kitchens may be gone, but their tastes whisper on, nudging you to savor the stories hidden in every noodle strand and spice jar. You settle into the final rhythms of this Tang Dynasty kitchen journey, senses alive with the imagined aromas, sounds, and tactile moments that wove together to form a vibrant culinary world. Picture the soft clinking of porcelain bowls lined up neatly near a roaring stove, the gentle hiss of simmering broths mingling with the fragrant sizzle of spices flashing in hot oil. The air hums with the subtle cadence of voices, lively merchants from faraway lands bargaining over exotic spices, servants moving briskly with trays of delicate pastries, and the occasional sharp laugh of an apprentice sloshing miso onto a floor already speckled with traces of past meals. The kitchen is a kaleidoscope of vibrant colors and muted textures, bowls of crimson chili paste, translucent dumpling wrappers stacked like tiled roofs, ceramic teapots rimmed in gold, and bamboo steamers puffing fragrant clouds like miniature dragons awakening from slumber. You feel the slight warmth radiating from a brazier overlaid with a cast iron wok, and a hint of smoky earthiness drifts in from the courtyard's charcoal braziers. Amidst this sensory symphony, you might sense the subdued, erratic pacing of cooks trying recipes passed down imperfectly over centuries, the tension and excitement of experimenting with foreign spices brought via the Silk Road. And in the background, the murmuring chant of monks reciting verses somewhere nearby adds a solemn note, reminding you that in Tang China, food was more than nourishment. It was intertwined with ritual, medicine, and poetry. Historians still argue whether this sensory atmosphere can ever be fully recaptured, a truth acknowledged by every scholar and chef digging into the past's fragile fragments. The kitchen, in all its noise, smell, and human drama, was a living ecosystem shifting constantly as new influences flowed in and traditions adapted. You might notice some whispers of continuity in markets today, where modern street vendors echo ancient calls, inviting customers to partake in cherished flavors, or in festivals where traditional foods evoke ancestral memories. There's a whimsical side to all this history, requiring a bit of imagination and gentle self-mockery as you picture the clumsy apprentice accidentally dropping a dumpling, or the grand chef sneaking a taste of an experimental sauce before presenting it to the emperor. These fleeting moments imbue the past's grand kitchens with humanity beyond their imperial grandeur. Slowly, as you nestle deeper into this twilight reverie, the loud colors soften, the sharp sizzles become gentle crackles, the clatter of pots fades into rhythmic breathing, and the bustling voices quiet to distant echoes. You find yourself enveloped in a calm, contented stillness, as if the Tang kitchens themselves have exhaled a final breath, inviting you to rest. Your eyelids grow heavier, The lingering aroma of ginger and star anise wafts delicately through your imagination. Before you drift entirely into slumber, consider that food connects us across time, culture, and space. Each bite a whisper from history's kitchen, and in that intimate act, the past stays alive inside us. Now, with the kitchen sounds as your lullaby and ancient spices sweetening the air, you can drift off peacefully, knowing this feast of stories will nourish your dreams.